We pick up with okay. Wait a minute. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, first wide line. Okay, of Yudzayin Amatet, about a third from the top. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Gedol Tshuva Shemikraat Zardino Shel Adam. Greatest tshuva. So now we're back to the sort of dialectic between the idea of a gzar din and then the idea of tefillah and tshuva that allows for a constant reassessment. So greatest tshuva that it tears up the gzar din, the sort of like the document in which your judgment has been written. Shel Adam. Hashmein li v'amazeh v'aznav hachbei v'einav hashab henyoreh be'einav v'aznav yishmav v'levo yavin v'shav v'rafei lav. So, the heart of this people has become fat, and their ears heavy, and their eyes blind, that lest they see with their eyes and their ears hear, and their heart understand, and they will do tshuva, and then they'll be healed. So you see that tshuva works even after gzar din. So the obvious question is, who told you that was after gzar din? Maybe that was before gzar din. Amalei v'rapei lo ksiv. You'll be healed. Why do you need healing? It must be that there was already an edict against you. There was something that was bad that now needs healing. Okay, well, I don't know, say healing in terms of your own, personhood and yourself as, and your own deeds. But okay, okay. Meisvei, I'll ask you on this. So now we're going to deal with this question whether tshuva works after gzar din. Hashav bein tayin mochlim lo. So if you do tshuva between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it'll be forgiven to you. Lo shav, if you don't do lo shav bein time, if you don't do tshuva between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, afilu hevi kol eleini vayot shebaolam, even if you bring all like the rams for sacrifices, all the fat rams in the world, ein mochlim lo, it won't be forgiven to you. So you see that after the gzar din, it won't be forgiven. You only have your chance until Yom Kippur. That's the context. Lo kash, it's not difficult. Habi yachid, habi tzibur. Difference whether it's a yachid or a tzibur. So now we're modifying ourselves. We're saying that tshuva works after gzar din only for a tzibur. All right, well, that's pretty radically modified. That means that every individual after Yom Kippur has no chance of reversing any decisions that were made up by Yom Kippur.
Unless you need them before Yom.
Well, right. So anyway, let's keep on going. Meisvei, I'll ask you on this. The eyes of God are on it, the land of Israel, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Itim l'tov, itim l'ra. Sometimes God will be inspecting it later in the year for good, sometimes for bad. Itim l'tov. Okay, so how does it mean for good? Hooray, Shai Yisrael Rishayim Gemurim Rosh Hashanah. Let's say they were completely wicked on Rosh Hashanah. Paskalem geshamim muatim, and was decided there would only be a small amount of rain. By the way, notice here the connection of the gzar din of rain on Rosh Hashanah. It goes back to some of the tensions in that Mishnah about rain, about when is the rain as opposed to and when is the person, etc. Anyway, it was decreed that they would only have a small amount of rain on Rosh Hashanah. So chazru behen, then they did tshuva. Lahosif aleini afshar, you can't add to them. Shekvar nigzera gzera, the gzera was already decreed. Ella, rather, God will bring the rain, but He'll bring it at the exact perfect time. So it'll be a small amount, but it'll be at the right time. And exactly on the lands that need it. So even a small amount, if it's exactly placed, it'll be for good. So the gzera is true, and in the end, there's the tshuva has its effect.
I'm sorry, the tshuva was after Yom Kippur?
Yeah, the tshuva was after Yom Kippur. All right. Okay. Now, Hakol fi haaretz. It's everything according to what is exactly needed for the land. Itim l'ra, sometimes it'll be for bad. They were totally tzaddikim. And there was just decreed that they would have a lot of rain. So then they did tshuva. It's funny, chazru, they didn't say tshuva. They reversed themselves. They went back to their evil ways. You can't give them less than was decreed. The gzera was already decreed. Brings it into bad time when rain isn't good for the crops. On the land that does not need it. So anyway, the gzera is true, and the tshuva, or the reversal, actually, interesting, of deeds is effective. So again, playing between the idea of a gzar din and a constant reevaluation of your deeds and what you are deserving. So the Gemara says, "L'tova mia likare, l'gzar dinaihu, v'losif lahu." So the Gemara says, "I don't get it though. That's sort of saying we're going to play within the system. But according to you, tshuva can really tear up the gzar din. You don't even have to worry about the earlier decree. So why didn't, in that scenario, why didn't you just say that God tears up the gzar din? So the Gemara says, Shani Asam de Efshabachi. No, as long as you can work within the system, we'll work within the system. Okay, so there, but Einachanami. If it required a tearing up of the Gzardin, it would tear up of the Gzardin. Okay, Tashma, of course it's funny by Tzibur. Of course, it's funny, the whole thing that we read by Yonah, on Yom Kippur is very much, God, reverses his decree, is that idea. I mean, some of that imagery, right, about God making a decree and reversing it and so on. I mean, you get some of that in Yonah.
That was a Tzibur.
That was a Tzibur. Tashma. Okay, Yordei Hayam Ba'aniyot. So this is the Psukim in Tehillim about actually this serves as the basis for the Korban Toda. Because it gives scenarios where people see God's saving, hand and come back and give thanks. So Yordei Hayam Ba'aniyot, those that go down to the sea in the ships, Osei Melachab B'mayim Rabim, that they do, they work in the great waters. Hema Ra'u Ma'aseh Hashem, they see the great deeds of God. Vayomar Vayamod Ruach Se'arav Atramein Galav Yachogu Vayanuch Yishikur. So the great wind comes up in the sea, and they the waves get raised very high, and they sway back and forth like the drunk. They call out to God when it is they're in anguish. And then God saves them. They give thanks to God for His kindness, for His greatness. Okay, so asay lehen simaniyot ke'achim v'achim shebetorah. Now, if you look at where that appears in Tanakh, I should have brought a Tanakh, but I did not.
Yeah, right here.
You got one there? Let's see if it replicates visually what it looks like, because there, where that appears in Tanakh, there are little, as the Gemara says, little special letters.
Rashi has it like the way he saw our own.
Right, which is exactly what it looks like. It's funny that I think Rashi says kazeh, because it's exactly that. Yeah, here. I don't know if people can see. Can you see here at the very beginning?
Sephardic says this chapter on Pesach.
Can you see the little nuns here, the upside down nuns at the beginning of the psukim? You'll trust me. You can pass it around. Okay? So all the thing that speaks about these people seeing the great things of God in the beginning of each pasuk, right there in the upper right-hand corner. You see the little nuns? Okay, so the Gemara says you can pass it to the other side. So the Gemara says like this. Okay, right. Okay, so the Gemara says, where are we? Wait a minute. Aselem simaniyot. It made these little signs in the beginning of the psukim. Kakim v'rakim shebetorah. Those signs show a certain sense of like the word ach or rak, like a little sense of that there's a reservation there. It's not complete. What does that mean? It means lomar lecha, to tell you, sa'aku kodem gazardin. So here they are, and the boat's about to be overturned, and it says they call out to God and God answers them. But it's with those little simanim to tell you, but not always, like an asterisk, is sort of like the Gemara says. It's like a big prize, like this. Here's this amazing thing, but there's a little asterisk. What does the asterisk mean? The asterisk means that only if they called out to God before Gzardin, sa'aku kodem gzardin ne'anim, then they'll be answered. Sa'aku lachar gzardin, if they call it after Gzardin, eina ne'anim, they will not be answered. What?
Even a Tzibur.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's everybody on the ship. So let's take a look. So that's what the Gemara says. Okay, so maybe you got a ship full of people, but they're not a tzibur. So that's not a proof. So now we're sort of reaffirming this idea that it works after the Mardin, but only for its tzibur. Tashma, no, let's go on. Tashma. Shala Blurya Hagioret. Blurya, the convert, asked, and Rabbi Gamliel, I don't know, Ksiv Toratchem. It says in your Torah. Okay, interesting. So if you take a look in the She'iltos where it repeats this story, it has a different version of it. It doesn't have the word Toratchem, because Toratchem is usually said when a non-Jew is challenging the rabbis, but here she's a Gioret. Okay, maybe she asked it before she converted. Anyway, let's take a look. Asher lo yisa panim. God does not show favor. See, but then the pasuk says, "Yisa Hashem panav elecha." God will lift His countenance to you. Now, of course, it's really not a contradiction, because it also says that Asher lo yisa panim means God doesn't show favor. It doesn't play favorites, and because somebody is rich or of a status, doesn't get a better, doesn't get a partial treatment. And God, Yisa Hashem panav elecha, means that God shows a good, a positive countenance towards you. God is favorable towards you. But anyway, let's take a look. It asks this has a contradiction. Nitfala Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen was given over to answer. He said to her, let me give you an example. Excuse me. A person who has lent his friend $100. And he said, and they went in front of the king, and the guy and said, "You're going to pay me by this date." And the guy who owed the money took an oath in the life of the king that he would pay him. He gives man velo para, and the time came, and the guy didn't pay. So the debtor went to the king because he basically had now, it was a sin against the king, not just against the creditor. So V'amarlo, and the king said to him, "El boni machulecha, my offense I will be mochel to you. You have to go now appease your friend because he's the one that you also took, did not pay up the money to." Hachanami, here too. It depends when between people and between a person and God. When it's between you and God, so the word of no say also is connected with no say avon, right? So God will forgive you. But when will God not forgive you? When it is you are sinning against another person, and then as long as you have not made good with the other person, God will not forgive you. That's how he read the verses. Until Rabbi Akiva came and said, top of Yud Chen Aleph, the difference is before Gzar Din and after Gzar Din. Before Gzar Din, God will forgive you. After Gzar Din, God will not forgive you. So the Gemara says, you see, after Gzar Din, no forgiveness. Same answer. Hachanami, the Yachid. Here too, we're talking about an individual. Okay, so now we have had a lot of contradictions, and we've resolved them by saying Gzar Din is torn up, could be torn up for a tzibur, not for a Yachid. So now the Gemara is going to not be satisfied with that, because that again pretty much means that as a Yachid you're stuck.
So he's
the Gzar Din's Yachid Tanaihi, but at the end of the day, the Gzar Din of the Yachid is a beit of Tanai, and whether that will be torn up after Gzar Din. The Tanya we're talking about Brisa. Hi Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir used to say, Shnayim sha'alu lemita. Two people went into the bed, this means that two people got sick. Were taken to the hospital. And they had the same illness. Where two people were brought to the to be judged, by the to be judged for a capital crime. Lidon. So the Gardam was a place where people were judged for capital crimes.
From the Latin.
From Latin word meaning what?
It means step. It replies to the way that the Romans would execute people.
Okay, like a gallows.
Yeah.
Okay, v'dinam shaveh, and they both have they both have the same judgment passed against them. They're both they're both being taken in for murder or something. But then what happens? The outcomes are different. One guy gets out of the bed, one guy comes home from the hospital, and the other guy died. One guy gets freed from the court, and the other guy didn't and got executed. How did it be that the outcomes were different? It must be so one prayed and was answered, and one prayed and wasn't answered. Okay, so that's the difference. One prayed.
They both prayed.
I'm sorry, they both prayed, right. So that doesn't answer the question. Why was one answered and one not answered? One prayed a true prayer, a full prayer, and the other was not a full prayer. Okay, so again, here's obviously the rabbi is trying to explain, why things happen in the world and what's the logical connection between those and schar onish and deeds, and just trying to explain God's hand in natural events. So attributing here to the question about how good was your prayer. But of course, look, these are the big problems. It's like the Gemara we said yesterday about how Rosh Hashanah everything gets decided. Tzaddikim will die and Rishayim will live. That was funny. Tzaddikim will live and Rishayim will die, and then the world doesn't exactly work out that way. So here, Rabbi Meir is trying to explain it based on how good was your tefillah. Rabbi Eliezer has a different answer. Kan kodem gzar din, kan lacher gzar din. Maybe one of them, they're both the same things were happening here on the earth, but one of them, if there was already had been a gzar din for him. The other, up in heaven, there had not been a gzar din. Okay, so again, that would reinforce the idea that after a gzar din, you're stuck.
So you're saying these two different time frames?
No, maybe, I don't know. Who knows what happened to the person on Rosh Hashanah? We don't know what happened up in heaven. And now it is the middle of the year. They both went to the hospital. But on Rosh Hashanah, one of them had a Gzar Din for Misa and the other didn't. So there, see, the Gzar Din cannot be reversed. So here's the point we were looking for, which is finally an opinion that says that even after Gzar Din and even for an individual, there can always be a reversal. Crying out, notice this, crying out, because that was the context of Rabbi Meir, tefillah, interestingly, not teshuvah. Crying out is good for a
And not
person.
tzedakah either.
Presumably, teshuvah would also be good, but crying out is good for a person whether before Gardin or after Gzardin. Okay, so meaning he didn't explain the idea of why one survived and one didn't, but maybe that's but he does underscore the idea that you can always reverse the Gzardin. So now the Gemara says, the Gzardin the Tzibur mi Mikra. So on the one hand, we had an opinion that says even the Gzardin of a Yachid could be torn up. Now we're going to go to the opposite extreme. Who says that a Gzardin of a Tzibur could be torn up? One verse says, Kipsi me ra'ali beich, cleanse your heart from evil. And the other verse says, if you will cleanse yourself with a lie and have much soap, nevertheless your sin is always stained before me. So you see, you can't cleanse the sin. My love, and that there was Yirmiyahu talking to the entire people. So my love, presumably the reconciliation is that what is talking before Gzardin, the other after, and you see that after Gzardin you can never fully cleanse it, even for a tzibur. It says no, they're both after Gzardin. And so what does it mean you can't cleanse it? If we've been insisting that at least for a tzibur, definitely there's a reversal. The lokash, convict sardin sheishimot shuva, convict sardin shivua, the convict sardin sheishimot shivua. So now, like all these different stages, it's quite fascinating. Again, right? The Gemara has an idea of din and a Gemara din, but wait. What about the idea of Adam Nida B'chol Yom? What about the idea of Tshuva? What about the idea of Tefillah? Okay, so we have a Gzardin, plus we've got Tshuva that can always work to reverse that. And then the question of Yachid and Tzibur. But then we have these other psukim that sound like you can't reverse it. So now we're going to create yet another hierarchy, which is there's a normal Gzardin, there's Ksiva, and there's Chatima. It's written on Yom Kippur, it's Nechtam. That's a Gzardin. That, however, can still be reversed. But then there's this other hierarchy, which is a Gzardin with a Shavua. When God takes an oath that this is the way it's going to remain, then that can't be reversed. Okay, Shenemar, as the verse says, I'm sorry. To Rav Shmuel bar Ami, Damar Rav Shmuel bar Ami, V'Amila Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmeni Amar Rav Yonasan. Minayin l'Gzardin sheish shemo shavua sheinu nikra. How do you know a Gzardin that has a shua that won't be torn up, even for a tzibur, presumably? Shenemar u'lechein nishpati lebeit Eli im kaper avon Eli bezevach u'bemincha. So I've taken an oath that it will not be atoned for.
That's for an individual.
So, right. I don't exactly get it. Number one, it's for an individual. Number two is, okay, God made a shua. How do you know that means that God? How do you? What?
It's not a tzibur.
I don't know. I would agree with Michael. I don't think that that's normally what counts as a tzibur, but okay. But but I don't know. All you see there is that there was a shua. I don't know how you see that that means that it won't ever be written up. Of course, that's the whole idea of a shua, that this is the way it will remain. But I don't see exactly what you see from the pasuk. Anyway, okay, so what's all fascinating is we introduce an idea of a ksiva and a chatima and a gzardin, but we don't let it lay that way. We speak about the fact that it could be torn up, and maybe, certainly for a tzibur, maybe for a yachid. Now we've introduced the idea of a shavua, and said that a shavua with a shavua can't be torn up, but now look what we're going to do. We're not going to let that sit either. So let's see the next statement. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Rava, says Rava, the sin won't be atoned for by a sacrifice or by a grain offering. Aval mitkaper b'Torah, can be atoned for by Torah. So it's not really violating the shvua. It's just playing like the loopholes, as it were, of the shvua. Okay, so fine, that's the way it won't be atoned. But maybe there's still a way it will be atoned for. Abaye Amar b'Zevachu b'Mincha ino mitkaper aval mitkaper b'Torah v'gmilus chasadim. And now this is a very famous Gemara. Now there's a question whether the first statement was Rava or Rabba. Most people have the first statement being Rabba, and it's consistent now with the next statement. Rabba v'Abai mid Beis Eli ka'asu. Rabba and Abai were both descendants of Beit Eli. So the reason they say it can't be Rava is because Eli was obviously a Kohen, and Rava we know was not a Kohen. Although Rashi says maybe his mother, maybe through his mother's side he was descendant of Beit Eli, which would be interesting if that would be included in the curse, right? Even the mother, even the women descendants. Okay, but we'll do with Rabba. Rabba and Abai from were Beit Eli. Rabba the Asik b'Torah Chaya Boing Shanim. Rabba, who learned Torah, lived for 40 years because that was some degree of a kapara for the sin. We'll see that if you don't have a kapara for the sin of Beit Eli, you die even younger than that, much younger. Abai, the Asik b'Torah u'b'gmilus chasadim, and Abai, he said that it's atoned for with Torah and gmilus chasadim, and he in his own life was osek in Torah and gmilus chasadim. Chaya shishin shnin. He lived even longer. He lived 60 years. If you take a look, Tosfos says the end of this Tosfos. 1 minute. He says like this. The Tosos Rabbah, it's near the bottom. It's the line that starts with the word Tehacha. It's about 6 lines before the Tosos Al. He says, Tehacha mashma de Rabbah lo hayalo zuchus shel gmilus chasadim. The Hamridim per Chelek Amalei Abai LeRabba Mar HaTorah HaGemilos Chasadim. That Abai himself said to Rabbah, but the master has in his hands Torah and Gemilos Chasadim. All right, nevertheless, Abai still did it, was more usek in it, right? So that's a question. Like a lot of people, fine, they do some good deeds. They have Gemilos Chasadim, but are you usek in Gemilos Chasadim? Like how much do you make it like a major commitment and a major part of what your, emphasis and your religious pursuits are? So Abai really emphasized not just Torah, but also doing good in the world, and Gemilos Chasadim, and it had this much more efficacious effect. Yes.
And yet we roll against it by almost all the time.
This is not a halachic debate, but all right. So it's a very powerful statement, about what it means just to be. This is from within the rabbis, just to be in the world, like in the little base medrash, and just to be staying within the rabbinic circle and learning Torah, as opposed to that obligation and that mandate to be osek b'gemilas chasadim, and the impact that it had. Yes.
What do you make in that same Tosafot? Apparently, Rava had a theological view that b'mazala.
Yeah,
that's like a huge.
I
asked that earlier.
Now you understand why I skipped that. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Tana, we'll do that when we learn that Gemara. Okay.
And then you're going to say we had it in the other Gemara.
No, I won't. That's not the topic here. That's the topic over there. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Okay, now. Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. 60 years is important because the Gemara says that that if you die, that if anybody who dies under 60 is considered still under the edict of like karet. That the idea of karet, let's put it this way: karet in the Gemara means that somebody will die. The way the Gemara understands under 60 doesn't mean that I don't think it's supposed to mean that anybody who dies under 60 is understood to be under that decree. But nevertheless, the idea that even Abaye did not, was only up to 60 years, because still was the curse, was still in effect. He only, pushed it off to a certain degree. He only atoned for it to a certain degree. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. There's a certain family in Yerushalayim that everybody used to die in 18 years. They told Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he said to them, maybe you're from the house of Eli. All of the multitudes of your house will die as men while they're still like young men. Go learn Torah and you will live. They went and they learned Torah and they lived. They called it the family of Rabbi Yochanan. Of course, it's interesting. He said learn Torah. He didn't say Torah and Gemilas Chasadim. Okay. One also, fine. It's interesting also about the whole issue of, the rabbis replace the rabbinic role replacing the role of the Kohanim. So it might be the Korbanos have lost their efficacy, but Torah, which is the replacement of the Korbanot, right, in the post-Korban period, has not lost its efficacy. And also the whole idea about the problem of Beit Eli was that it was the power that led to the abuse, what happens when you empower a particular religious class and the abuse that it leads to. So presumably that also has to do with the importance here of Gemilos Chasadim, of the idea that if a life of Torah, translates also into Gemilut Chasadim, then that's really the atonement for the sin of Beit Eli. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. So basically what have we said? There's a Gzar Din with a Shvua that can't be torn up, but maybe there can be some loopholes. And then there's a normal Gzar Din which could be torn up for a Tzibur and maybe even for a Yachid. Okay, so Amar Shmuel Bar Inya Mishmei Rav Minayin Gzar Din Shel Tzibur She'eno Nechtam. How do you know the Gzar Din with Tzibur? Not only could it be torn up, but never really gets finally sealed. It always is left open-ended. So the Gemara can't accept that. Even before he gets to quote his pasuk, the Gemara says, "Eino nechtam," it's not sealed. Vaksiv nichtam avonech lefanai, which has to be a play on words. Your sin is always stained before me, but presumably there's also a play here of nichtam and nechtam. Okay. But that was the pasuk quoted earlier, which is no matter how much soap you use, the stain will always remain, which sounds like there's an idea of it being sealed. So the Gemara says, "Ela afakav shenechtam dikra." How do you know even after it is sealed that it will be torn up? Shenemar kosh, because it says Hashem Elokeinu b'chol kareinu elav. Like Hashem our God, whenever we call out to Him, He will respond to us, even after the Gzar Din. So, and that's a tzibur, by the way. B'chol kar'enu, when we, as a people, call out to him. Haksiv, 1 minute, but doesn't the verse says, Yeshua Hashem b'hi matzo, seek out God when he will be found, not at all times, only when God will be found. So you see that God is not always accessible. No, hasam b'yachid, hacha b'tzibur. Again, the difference of yachid and tzibur, right? Tzibur, whenever you call out. By the yachid, only b'hi matzo. The Gemara says Yachid Emas, and when is this time by the Yachid? When is God available? Amar Rabbi Baravua, Elu Aser Shemim Shebein Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. These are the Aser Shemei Tshuva, the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's when God is particularly responsive. By the way, we should point out that there are not 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There are 7 or 8, depending on if you have 1 or 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. But okay, including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yes.
We also read that on Rosh Chodesh.
Of Yeshua
On fasting.
Right, Yeshua Hashem Matzah. Correct. That is correct. And the interesting thing here, though, is that it's understanding that this also allows for the tearing up of a Gzar Din. So whenever this Behi Matzah is, again, we have the possibility that even for a Yachid, you can have the tearing up of a Gemar Din, if it's at the right time. And now we just have another statement about the Aser Shemei Tshuva. Lehi K'aseret Hayamim. It was after 10 days. Vayikov Hashem et Naval, when God smote Naval. Yud Yami Maya Vidatayu. Why did God wait 10 days? Amar Rav Yud Amar Rav, can I get a sar ligimot shenatan naval avdei David? Because when David sent his messengers and his servants to him, he gave them food. So actually, Rashi says there weren't 10 separate times, but it says in the Psukim that David sent 10 people and he fed them all one meal. So that's 10 meals he gave them all at the same time. But okay. So anyway, because of that. That God gave him a 10-day reprieve. So that's one answer. Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua. No, Eilos Hayamim Shebein Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim. God gave Naval 10 days to do tshuva, and only afterwards did he bring this punishment on him. So anyway, what we see from all of this is, just to put it all in context, right? It goes back to the whole Mishnah about the idea of when is the din for the fruit and the rain, etc. Is it tchilas din, sof din, particularly on the regalim? Then the issue of the human being, which is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then we led to a much larger discussion here about this idea of gzar din and whether gzar din can ever be reversed afterwards. Can it be reversed for a tzibur? Can it be reversed for a yachid? Debates about yachid, yes, by a tzibur. Then issues even with a gzar din sheyoshimo shvua, etc. Okay, and also to remind you what we did, very central Gemara, this whole thing about when these dinim take place, the idea of a din, Shlosha Sfarim Nishtachim, the 3 books, Rishayim, Tzadikim, and Beinonim, also wasn't in our Mishnah. On the one hand, that idea of Rosh Hashanah, and also that idea of, Bacharit HaYamim, in the Messianic times when there will finally be a resurrection and everybody will be judged, and all the people that will then go to Gehenna and through a period in Gehenna will ultimately merit the world to come, and then people that will completely be destroyed in Gehenna. So a lot of sort of eschatology and final judgment, these are some of the really core discussions around those issues. Now we end this discussion with going back to our Mishnah and looking specifically about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yes?
Fast days then only in terms of that sense of seeking Hashem for the community and the individual in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?
I don't know. In general, it's usually the Yeshua Hashem B'Matzah is understood to be between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Not so much the fast days. The fast days are days that we call out to God, but not a day that I think religiously we necessarily think that God is particularly, receptive to our tshuva. I know it's a little ironic because we're trying to do tshuva, but the idea of God's receptivity tends to be focused not on the fast days, but on the Aser Shemei Tshuva. Okay. All right. So let's take a look now at the final point about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah, Kobaya Lamavim Lefanav Kibnei Maron. Rosh Hashanah, all those that enter in the world, presumably all humankind, pass before God like Bnei Maron. My Kibnei Maron. What are Bnei Maron? So Hacha Targimu Kibnei Amrana. Here in Israel, in Bavel, we translate it as Bnei Amrana. What does that mean? So if you look at Rashi says. Where's the Rashi? Kibnei Amran, about 10 lines from the top, 15 lines from the top. Kikvasim, shamoninotam la'asuran, like a lamb, sheep that you count what you take meiser. V'yotzim zechar zeh bepetach katan, shein yicholim latzei kechad. Like we've been talking about meiser behema. So you take lambs that are walking, sheep that are walking single file, and that they're being counted. I'm going to read the 3 explanations, and then I'm going to talk about the symbolism. Okay, Reish Lakish Amar k'ma'alot beit maron, like the a sense in Beit Maron. What does that mean? So Rashi again says, Haderech katzar ve'ein shnayim yicholim lilech zeh b'tzad zeh she'emek amok mishnei tzidei haderech. Okay, so basically what you've got is, you've got like one of those mountain passes, right? You got like, I don't know, you know those roads on those mountain passes? Right, and here's the valley below. Okay, so you're going up the Alot B'nei Maron, very narrow, one by one, and there's this like huge valley below. Okay, that's Alot B'nei Maron. Where were we? And Rabbi Amar Rav Yudam Shmuel Ki Chayalot Shel Beit David. No, like the soldiers of Beit David. Rashi says that the language is like in marut va'adnut. Somehow maron means like of a master. But anyway, like soldiers walking in single file.
That's very different imagery.
Right. So exactly. So the imagery here, I think, is very powerful in three different imageries of what it means to be standing in din on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This is, I think, the scariest one. Right. You're all walking like on that narrow precipice. Right. A little slip, and then you go down into the valley below. So this is the one that really sort of has that sense about hanging by a thread and the precariousness of your life hanging in judgment. The idea of sheep,
like for a slaughter one.
Well, no, I don't know. You could say that, but who counts the sheep is the shepherd. I sort of see the one about the sheep as very much about sort of God as the caring, nurturing, sort of shepherd. We are the innocent sheep. We're like helpless, but we sort of. But we we give over our trust into God. So we acknowledge our helplessness, but we also believe that God is the shepherd that is tending to us and caring for us. So Chayalot Beit David is what?
Yeah, it's just random.
Well, Rashi has the idea of counting every 10th one. That's not in the Gemara. The Gemara just is the sheep. I don't know. I wouldn't underscore that. But the Chayalot Beit David
is only 1,000 years old.
The Chayalot Beit David, I would say, hold on. The Chayalot Beit David, I would say, is very powerful, and sort of speak about a sense of like pride. Like, if we've done tshuva and we've worked at it, and we're, and we understand what our responsibilities are, and we're ready to stand for like what is it the soldiers stand for when the not the inspection. Here we are, we're ready for inspection. We've shined our shoes, and we've got our, and everything's in place, and we're standing for inspection. It's a very different type of an imagery of how we think of ourselves approaching it. Seth, you wanted to say something before?
I was just going to say that the shepherd and flock finds its way into the liturgy.
Oh, kibakarat roa edro, right? Ken yav yitzono tachas kifta, right? But you're right. But then it also has that sense of like you don't know which one is going to survive, right? Right. So that's true. I was trying to maybe make it a little bit.
I still about the shepherd tending to the flock.
I think so. I think that's still there. Yes. What do you want?
Both ArtScroll and Steinsaltz suggested that Rish Lakish may be referring specifically to Har Meron in northern Israel.
Okay.
That apparently is a very steep and dangerous path up there.
Okay, good. But I think Kibnei Maron, this idea that it means soldiers, does he say something in Steinsaltz? I think I remember that there was some etymology about that, about Bnei Maron meaning soldiers, no?
The Jewish people are the army of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in constant battle with their Yetzer Hara.
Oh, okay. That wasn't exactly what I was saying. But anyway, but he doesn't say something about the word B'nai Maron meaning? Yeah?
Authority here, when he talks about it. He says Marut.
Yeah, that's what Rashi says. Yeah, the Rashi says that. But I thought there was some other
check the Hebrew.
I thought there was some other etymology of B'nai Maron meaning some maybe Latin root or something. All right, anyway. Moving on. Anyway, very powerful different imageries about the din on Rosh Hashanah.
I think Albeck takes it as one word, and it's
Kibinumaran.
Yeah.
I think there's some word like
Greek word.
Kibinumaran, not B'nai Maron.
Is it enumerated numbers?
Something like that. You'll see what the Hebrew Steinsaltz has. I do remember that there's some Greek etymology here. Okay, so even though they are judged one by one, all of these also have an idea of single file. Nevertheless, God looks at all of them in one moment. In one glance, God looks at everyone and judges everyone individually. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Afananami Tanina, that's implicit in our Mishnah, because the Mishnah ended with the pasuk of Hayotzi Yachud Liban Hamevina Kol Ma'asehem. He looks, he creates, fashions their heart as one, and understands all their deeds. So my kamar, what does the verse mean? Ilemer hachi kamar, this is what it means. God takes the whole world and unites their hearts as one. Meaning, hayotzer yachad libam, he fashions their heart as one. He takes everybody's heart and makes it all as one, like creates unity. It's not true. We're not a unified world. Ella, that's not what the pasuk means. It's not that God fashions together our hearts. Ella lav hachi kama. This is how you read the verse. Hayotzer, the creator, kama yachad libam, ro'eh yachad libam, sees everybody's hearts as one. And understands all of their deeds. So God sees us all at the same time, even though He's seeing us all individually. Okay. So that's the idea that we're all judged individually and we're also all judged at once.
It's the Hebrew text.
Okay, so what does he have here? B'nei Maron. That's Malach B'nei Chorin. Oh, B'nei Maron. Mikitve Yad Shonim Hagorsim Kibenumeron. Mashma Sheperusho et Shorish Hamila mean numerous. Halitani, the Latin word numerous. Ader Hashalam Yavanit from the Greek word numeron, which means Anshe Tzava, right? Men of soldiers. In Greek, there is a phrase: people standing as in a numeron. So exactly that phrase, not just that the word numeron means soldiers, but to stand as a soldier is a Greek phrase. So that almost definitely is the original shot of that. Okay, thank you. Al Shisha, next Mishnah. Al Shisha Dvarim Hashluchim Yotzim. So now we have 4 Rosh Hashanim. I'm sorry, Shisha Chadashim. We have 4 Rosh Hashanim. We have 4 times people are judged. 4 periods of judgment. 6 times, 6 Rosh Chadashim that the Shluchim go out to tell people, when Rosh Chodesh was established. Al Nisan Mitnei Pesach. On Nisan to tell people that they, when Rosh Chodesh Nisan is, so they should know when to celebrate Pesach. Al Av Mitnei Hatanit, and also they should know when it's Tisha B'Av.
So when are they going out?
They are going out right after Beis Din was Mekadesh HaChodesh.
No, but is this the time they make the Mikdash?
So presumably it is. No, presumably it's after Korban Abayis. So your question is, what does Pesach mean? Does Pesach mean Chag HaMatzos? Presumably Pesach means Chag HaMatzos. Doesn't mean the Korban Pesach. But that's a good question. There is some discussion about, there's definitely evidence that after Korban Abayis, people were still bringing Pesach or pseudo-Pesach, maybe a Pesach on Har Bayis, a pseudo-Pesach off of Har Bayis. So some people want to say that Nisan Mitnei Pesach means for those people that were still bringing a type of a Korban Pesach. I find that a very hard to believe reason, because even if there were some people doing it, that the central basin would be sending out shluchim. I mean, yes, even if we say that, the strong opposition to that came later and it was somewhat tolerated or somewhat even accepted, but that they would send out shluchim for that, that's not a tzibur need, I find that hard to believe.
Question?
Pesach presumably here just means Chag HaMatzos, what we call Pesach, which already in the Mishnah is called Pesach. I mean, it's already in the earlier Mishnah, right? It's Pesach al Hatfuap, Pesach means Chag HaMatzos, does not mean the Korban Pesach. Yes.
Could have been during the Bar Kokhba era when we got back control of Yerushalayim for a few years.
Maybe. I mean, they
didn't pretend to like the Bar Kokhba.
Yeah. But they would do Kiddush HaChodesh even after Korban Abayis.
Yeah.
This is presumably after Korban Abayis. So on Nisan to tell people when they were Mekadesh HaChodesh so that they could celebrate, Pesach at the right time. Al Abit Neatanis and after Tisha B'Av. Al El B'nei Rosh Hashanah, on El of Rosh Hashanah, because you can't send them out on Rosh Hashanah to tell people when to celebrate Rosh Hashanah. So people have to assume, since almost all years El was only 29 days. So if you know when Rosh Chodesh Elul is, and you assume 29 days, you can figure out when Rosh Hashanah is. Al Tishrei Mitnei Tikkun HaMoedas. Then after Rosh Hashanah, they would send out the shluchim to tell them when Tishrei was established, so that they could correct in case it was wrong, in case Elul wasn't 29 days, or to reaffirm that people made sure that you were right, that is what Rosh Hashanah was. So they sent them out after Rosh Hashanah to tell them about Rosh Chodesh Tishrei just to be safe. On Kislev they sent them out for Chanukah. That's when they had the longest time to get to people. Adar Mitnei Purim, and on Adar they sent them out to know when to celebrate Purim. And obviously they didn't have to send out people for Shavuos, because you figure it out based on Pesach. Okay? Based on Mikdash Kayam, and here's the evidence that we're talking after Korban, when there was a Beis HaMikdash. Yotzim Alf Ala Iyam Pesach Katan. They go out from even an ear to tell people when to bring the Pesach Sheni. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "V'leifuk nami at Tammuz v'Teves." Why not? If you're going out for Tisha B'av, go out for Tammuz and Teves, for Shivat Tammuz and Asar v'Teves. If people have to know when to do the fasts, so obviously the obvious reason is that you're not, you can only send out shluchim so many times, so maybe the minor fasts don't warrant it as much, which is essentially what the Gemara is going to say. Let's take a look. Damar Rav Chana bar Biz Namar Reb Shimon Chasida. What's meant by the verse? Kol Hashem tzvakos, tzomar v'i v'tzomar chamishi v'tzomar shvi'i v'tzomar asiri, yel beis Yudah l'sason l'simcha. So says the Lord of hosts. Right, this is when they came back in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, and they were asking Zechariah, should we continue to fast as we have fasted until now? And the prophecy was, no, those things that had been fast, they will become days of rejoicing now that we're having a rebuilding of the temple. So what are those days? So the day of the fourth, well, the Gemara will say. So these are basically all of our fasts. We'll see how the Gemara unpacks that in a minute. It calls it both a fast and it calls it rejoicing. It's funny that the Gemara makes it like it's a problem. The psukim are explicit that one is transforming into the other, which is what the Gemara says. Bizman sheyei shalom, when there's peace, meaning it's good times, certainly times that there's a Beis HaMikdash, we'll see how shalom is explained. Yulas hason l'simcha, those days transform into days of rejoicing. Ein shalom, if there's no peace, so it's a fast day. So you have all these fast days. So if you have all these fast days, right, Shifasar b'Tammuz, Asar b'Teves, etc., why aren't, and that's when there's a Chorban Habayis, why aren't the Shluchim going out for the fast days? So Amar Papa Hachi Kamar. No, here's how you have to read it. Bizman sheish shalom, when there's true peace, it's like a time of a Beis HaMikdash, Yulas hason l'simcha, it's a time of rejoicing. Yesh gzeirat hamalchut, if it's the opposite extreme, there's the edict from the government, meaning like we're under oppression, at a time of oppression, tzom, then they're fast days. Ein gzeirat hamalchus, if it's like a time where, on the one hand, it's not a perfect time, there's no Beis HaMikdash, on the other hand, we're not being actively oppressed, in those types of times, Ein shalom, it's not gzeirat malchut, but it's also not shalom, then ratzu misanim, ratzu ein misanim, if you want to, you fast, if you want to, you don't fast. So you don't have to fast on the minor fast days when it's not a period of oppression. And by the way, it's funny. I still, briskers who tend to be machmir on everything, crazy chumras, apparently they have a tradition, I don't know if this is true about all of them, but the ones I knew, that they basically don't fast on the minor fast days. So I was like, once I was like shocked, and I was like, I was thinking something, what, are like you a chola? Is it hard for you to fast? Does it give you a headache? Because, the threshold is a lot less on these minor fasts. Just, no, I don't want to. It gets in the way of my Talmud Torah. So anyway, again, I can't promise that that's how all of them act, but it is pretty interesting that in principle, that's the halacha of Ratzu Ein Misanim, but you go try to find that in the Shulchan Aruch, the threshold is lower in terms of like headaches and whatever, but nevertheless, that's pretty, we have somewhat bracketed that halacha. So the Gemara says,
yes. It says the community as a whole. It's not an individual choice. There's a whole.
It has to Ratzu Ein Misanim.
Community made the choice.
Yeah. Let's go see if we do that in our entire community, make that choice, see how happy people are with it. Anyway, but okay.
We're in trouble enough.
I figured anyway, people would say something like, it's sort of like Mariv. Mariv is Rishus, but now we've all decided to do it. Okay. Ihachi says the Gemara. Anyway, that's why they don't go out, because, you don't have to do it. If that's true, don't go out for Tisha B'Av. That's also one of the fast days listed here. No. Amrav Papa Shani Tisha B'Av Ho v'huchbelu bo tsaros. No, Tisha B'Av is special. There were so many, tragedies that befell us on Tisha B'Av. That is not an optional fast day. The Amar Ma'ar, because we teach, but Tisha B'Av Karav Habayis Barishonu B'Shniya. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed the first time and the second time. The Nilkata Beisar was destroyed. V'nechra Sha'ir, the city was plowed over. So, and now Tosfos points out that, the Gemara, it also says in Tanis that there were many things that happened in Kivasar B'Tammuz. But Tosfos says, but the repetition, first of all, the weight of what happened, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, but also the same thing twice. It wasn't like 5 different random things. Okay, obviously Tisha B'Av is much later. Also, Tisha B'Av starts the night before, whereas these other fast days do not. Although when we learn Tanis, we'll see some issues around how obvious all of those differences are. But clearly Tisha B'Av has a special status. Okay, Tad and we taught in Bryce, and now we're going to look at unpacking this pasuk that lists the different fast days.
It's interesting, though. It's not that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed.
Is itself enough.
The time, the doubling.
The doubling, right. Right, it is true. You would have said that just the fact that it's the day of the Korban Habayis is itself the point. Amar Reb Shimon, right, that's true. Amar Reb Shimon, Arba Dvarim Hayi Rabbi Akiva Doreish. Rabbi Shimon said 4 things Rabbi Akiva used to explicate. Ani Ein Doreish Kamotar, and I don't agree with his interpretation. Okay, and now we're going to look at one of them. The other 3, you could go look at the Tosefta. We're going to look at one of them. Tzom Harvi'i, so this is how Rabbi Akiva explains it. The fast of the 4th, Zet Tisha B'Tammuz, right? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Obviously the numbers here are counting the months. So he says the 9th of Tammuz. Now we would say Shivasar B'Tammuz, okay? Because the first Beis Hamikdash, this Shebo Hufka Ir, that's when the city was breached. Shenemar B'Tisha L'Chodesh Vayachzak Harav Be'ir V'lo Haya Lechem La'am Haaretz. It was in the 9th of the month, and the famine was great, and there was no bread. Vatibakah Ha'ir, and the city was breached. Now, Tosfos says, if you look at Tosfos, said Tisha B'Tammuz, Tosfos says, Hainu B'Rishonah, the first Beis Hamikdash, it was breached on the 9th. Avo B'Shniya Hufka B'Yud Zayin. We do it on the 17th because that was the second Beis Hamikdash. But then he quotes a fascinating Yerushalmi. He says, and the Yerushalmi's girsa is the 17th of Tammuz, even in the first Beis Hamikdash. The Afagav Dechsi B'Kra B'Tisha L'Chodesh, Kilku Cheshbonos Hayusham. So the Yerushalmi says, this is amazing. The verse says the city was breached on the 9th. It was really the 17th. But there was so much sorrows that they got the date wrong. Okay? In the Pasuk, the people at the time thought it was the 17th, thought it was the 9th, it was actually the 17th. Since the people thought it was the 9th, even though it was really the 17th, the Pasuk said the 9th, even though it was really the 17th. Pretty shocking. Anyway, here it says the 9th, we do it the 17th, either because that was the original date, but they got it wrong, or because this more standard explanation is the second Beis Hamikdash. This happened on the 17th. Okay, so the city was breached. So that's 9th or Shivasar B'Tammuz. That's Tzom Harvi'i. Tzom HaChamishi, last narrow line. Zet Tisha B'Av, that's the Tisha B'Av. Shabo Nisraf Beis Elokeinu, that where the house of our God was burned. The Amai Karle Chamishi, what does Chamishi mean? Chamishi L'Chadashim, the 5th month. Okay, I'm sorry, did I skip the line before? It said, V'mai Karle Revi L'Chadashim, fine. Tammuz is the 4th of the month, and 5 is the 5th of the month, is Av. Tzom HaShvi'i, the 7th month. Ze Gimel B'Tishrei, Shabo Nera Gedalia Ben Achikam. That's the 3rd of Tishrei, when the Gedalia Ben Achikam, the governor that was left behind, was murdered in this whole plot. Umi Hargo, who killed him, Yishmael Ben Netanya Hargo. To teach you, it's right there in the list. It's given equal weight to Tisha B'Av. So the killing of the righteous, funny that Gedalia is the righteous, anyway, is as important as, he didn't want to accept Lashon Hara, anyway, is as weighty as the burning of our temple. Why is it called the 7th? The 7th month, counting from Nisan. Tishrei is the 7th month. Tzom HaSiri, the 10th month. Ze Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet. Shabo Samach Melech Bavel Yerushalayim. That's when the king of Bavel laid siege to Jerusalem, which happened obviously chronologically before all these other events. Shenemar V'Yidvar Hashem Elai B'Shana She'it B'Chodesh HaSiri, on the 10th month. B'Asor L'Chodesh, on the 10th of the month. Again, counting from Nisan, that's Asara B'Tevet. Lemor Ben Adam Ksov L'Cha Et Shem Hayom Hazeh Et Shem Hayom Et Etzem Hayom Hazeh. Right this day, in the middle of this day, Samach Hayom Hazeh Samach Melech Bavel Al Yerushalayim. The very essence of this day, write down this date. You will see that this is the date when the king of Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem.
How do you get Samach to mean siege?
Samach, he drew close to, but it means he surrounded the city. Okay, he approached the city. Is literally what it means. The Amai Karile Asiri, why is it called the 10th? Asiri L'Chadashim, the 10th of the months. Okay, so that's what we have. The fasts as we know them. Now we've just got one question. That should have been first, because that chronologically, the laying siege happened before all the rest. Why was it in here today? In order to have the months go in order, right? Because if you have, right, Revi'i, Chamishi, anyway, what's the next one? Some are Revi'i, some are Chamishi, some are Shvi'i, some are Asiri, right? So this is Tammuz, Av, Tishrei, and Tevet, right? So, and this is, right, so, and then this is the breaching of the city. Korban Habayis, Gedalia. So all of that is chronological order, right? The city was breached. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. They were sent into Galus, right? There was a contingent left behind that Gedalia was put in charge of, right? And then he was assassinated. But then we have a Asar B'Teves, which is Samach Melech Bavel, right? So which is chronologically happened obviously before the breaching. So that's what he says. This should have been mentioned first, but we had it this way in order to list all the months in order. Okay, so back to the Gemara. That's Rabbi Akiva. Ani and I, Eini Omer Kamukain. I don't say that. The Tzomach Hasiri is not Asara B'Tevet, which chronologically happened much earlier. It's the 5th of Tevet. What happened on the 5th of Tevet? Shabo Basa Shmuel Legola Shuchsayir. That's when the report came to the exile, the people that had been exiled before Chorban Habayis, right? There was a whole major section of the community that had already been sent in exile like 11, 12 years before Chorban Habayis. That's when they heard of the Chorban Habayis. Shenemar Vayhi B'Shtei, this is Vayhi B'Shtei Esrei Shana B'Asiri B'Chamisha L'Chodesh, on the 5th of Tevet, Legaluteinu, of our exile. Ba'ilai HaPalit, right, it was the 12th year of the exile, of that contingent that had been exiled earlier, 12 years earlier, excuse me. Ba'ilai HaPalit Yerushalayim Lemor, the refugee came from Jerusalem to say, Huchsa Ha'ir, that the city has been destroyed. So that was when the report came to the exile. V'asu Yom Shmua Ki Yom Sreifa, and the day of the report was as bad. We have some of these ideas like Avelos. When you hear about a death, even after the fact, it's sort of like, then that becomes like the Yom Kivura. So the day of hearing of that was like the day in which the temple was destroyed. That's when it was experienced by the exile. And that's what I say this is. So he says this is not Samach Mamor Bavel. This is the report reached Bavel. Report reached the Galut. And then it is also in exact chronological order. It was breached. It was destroyed. Gedalia was assassinated. And finally they heard about all the events in Galus. Where is it? My approach appears more correct than his. I've got everything happening in right chronological order. He says about the first thing last, right? The laying siege is at the end of the list, and the last thing is first. Not the last thing is first, but a later thing in the list appears first. But he'll say, look, it doesn't matter. I'm going according, it's just listing the months in order. And I say in addition to the months being listed in order, also you actually have the events listed in order. Okay, and we will pick up with this tomorrow now that we understand what those various fast days are. Okay.
This is
What's
all.
nice about Rabbi Shimon is that it's all